Tel Aviv, Israel, September 16th, 2025. On a humid morning in Tel Aviv, Israel's political and legal worlds collided once more as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu walked through the glass doors of the district court. Cameras whirred, reporters jostled for position, and a line of security officers created a corridor that allowed the country's most powerful man to slip into a space where his power is constantly under scrutiny: the courtroom. This was no ordinary appearance. Netanyahu, the longest-serving leader in Israel's history, has faced countless crises over his decades in politics, but none as personal, drawn out, or consequential as this: a corruption trial that continues to shape Israel's political landscape. Netanyahu is the first sitting Israeli prime minister to face criminal proceedings while still in office. The charges against him are serious: bribery, fraud, and breach of public trust across 3 separate cases. These cases, collectively known in Israel as Case 1000, Case 2000, and Case 4000, allege a web of gifts, political favors, and media manipulation. For Netanyahu's critics, this trial symbolizes the very rot they say has long plagued Israeli politics: cozy ties between money, media, and power. For his supporters, however, it represents something else entirely: what they call a witch hunt, designed to weaken the most resilient leader Israel has produced in generations. As one observer outside the courthouse whispered to a colleague, "This is the theatre of our democracy." Netanyahu in the dock is not just about law, it's about the soul of this country. Television footage captured Netanyahu stepping out of his convoy, flanked by aides and security guards. He moved briskly, his expression firm but not defiant. He wore his trademark dark suit and blue tie and carried himself with the air of a man who has made peace with the routine of court appearances. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. Reporters were ushered out after capturing the opening moments. The courtroom filled with lawyers, judges, and the hum of quiet conversations. Wide shots showed the chamber waiting, empty yet heavy with expectation, before Netanyahu's entrance. For many Israelis watching on live television, these images were almost surreal. To see their prime minister, a man who only days earlier was addressing lawmakers about security threats from Iran and Hamas, now sitting silently before a panel of judges, was a striking reminder of the blurred line between politics and justice. The allegations center on 3 different cases. Case 1000 involves claims that Netanyahu and his family received lavish gifts, including cigars, champagne, and jewelry, from wealthy businessmen in exchange for political favors. Case 2000 accuses Netanyahu of negotiating favorable media coverage with Arnon Moses, the publisher of Yedioth Aharonoth, one of Israel's leading newspapers, in return for legislative benefits that would have weakened a rival paper. Case 4000, perhaps the most explosive, alleges that Netanyahu granted regulatory advantages to Shaul Elovitch, the controlling shareholder of Bezek, Israel's largest telecommunications company, in exchange for positive coverage on Elovitch's popular Walla news site. Netanyahu has consistently denied all allegations. His line has remained steady throughout the years. These are politically motivated charges designed by opponents and prosecutors to remove him from power. In one of his most repeated defenses, Netanyahu has declared, "There will be nothing because there is nothing." Benjamin Netanyahu. Reactions outside the courtroom were as polarized as ever. Supporters gathered with Israeli flags, chanting slogans defending the prime minister and accusing the judiciary of bias. Opponents held placards demanding accountability, some with slogans calling him the defendant-in-chief. Political analysts note that Israel's democratic institutions are being stress-tested like never before. The case raises profound questions. Can a sitting prime minister govern effectively while standing trial? Should leaders accused of such grave charges step aside until cleared? Or does removing them prematurely undermine the will of voters? This hearing comes at a time when Israel faces not only domestic legal battles, but also geopolitical crises. Netanyahu has recently navigated tense standoffs with Hamas in Gaza, warned about Iran's nuclear ambitions, and dealt with diplomatic turbulence involving Qatar and the United States. The juxtaposition is stark. One day, Netanyahu is at the podium alongside US officials, warning that Hamas needs to cease to exist as an armed element that can threaten peace and security in the region. And the next, he is quietly sitting before judges, defending himself against allegations of personal corruption. For many, it underscores a paradox: a leader capable of commanding the international stage while simultaneously fighting for his personal freedom at home. As the cameras were escorted out, the trial resumed its meticulous pace. Witnesses are expected to provide testimony on the flow of gifts, communications between Netanyahu and media executives, and the intricate details of regulatory decisions made under his watch. The judges, seasoned veterans of Israel's legal system, appeared impassive as lawyers argued over motions, evidence, and timelines. Netanyahu sat still, occasionally conferring with his attorneys. He did not address the press on his way in or out. Silence has increasingly become his strategy when walking into the courthouse, a contrast to his fiery speeches on the political stage. Polls continue to show a divided public. A significant portion of Israelis believe Netanyahu is guilty and should resign. Others remain fiercely loyal, crediting him with strengthening Israel's security, expanding its diplomatic reach, and steering its economy through turbulent times. One Tel Aviv resident summed it up: he may be guilty, he may be innocent, but no one else has his experience. Replacing him now could weaken Israel at the worst possible moment. Meanwhile, critics argue that clinging to power while under indictment undermines trust in democracy. They insist that no leader should be above the law and that Netanyahu's refusal to step aside sets a dangerous precedent. Whatever the outcome, this trial will define Netanyahu's legacy as much as his diplomatic or security achievements. If acquitted, he could claim vindication and strengthen his grip on power. If convicted, Israel would enter uncharted territory, a sitting prime minister forced to leave office by court order. Historians are already debating how this chapter will be remembered. Will Netanyahu be seen as a resilient leader persecuted by political enemies, or as a cautionary tale of power unchecked? The hearing is just one of many scheduled sessions. Legal experts predict the trial could drag on for months, even years, given the complexity of the evidence and the determination of both sides to fight every detail. For now, the courtroom remains a stage where law and politics intertwine. Netanyahu's every movement, from the moment he steps out of his convoy to the instant he takes his seat before the judges, carries symbolic weight for a nation deeply invested in the outcome. The day's final images lingered: wide shots of the empty courtroom before the proceedings began, close-ups of chairs waiting to be filled, and the mid-shot of Netanyahu himself, a solitary figure in a place where power and vulnerability converge. It was a reminder that beneath the layers of politics, diplomacy, and public relations, one fact remains unchanged. Israel's prime minister is, like any citizen, subject to the rule of law.